In this episode, I am joined by Dr. James Justin Sledge, a professor of philosophy and religion, specialized in the Western Esoteric tradition, and founder of the popular Esoterica YouTube channel. Dr. Sledge recounts how his working-class upbringing profoundly influenced both his view of academia and his work ethic within it. He recounts his early fascination with philosophers and mystics, and recalls his studies in religion, philosophy, and the occult. Dr. Sledge discusses the importance of language learning in academic study of religion, and shares his own practical strategies for achieving competency in several ancient and modern languages, including Latin, Hebrew, German, French, Akkadian, and more. Dr. Sledge also shares his views on education, diagnoses its problems and offers solutions, gives practical advice to the self-learner, and reveals his surprising view on whether or not attaining enlightenment is worth the effort. So without further ado, Dr. James Justin Sledge. Dr. Justin Sledge, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I'm so delighted to be talking with you today. You've had quite a remarkable life and a remarkable career also as an academic, studying, among other things, Western Occultism and Western Esotericism. And that term itself is very interesting and something you discuss in great depth, so hopefully we'll return to that. But I wondered if we might begin with your biography, and in particular your upbringing. On your website you write, Dr. James Justin Sledge was born and raised in a proud working-class Mississippi family. He learned the fundamental value of labor from his father, who was a pipe fitter, and the crucial importance of unwaged labor from his mother. So I wonder if you might say something about the context of your upbringing in Mississippi.
Yeah, I was raised in, like I said, a working-class family. I did working-class work as my first job. I was a helper for my father as a pipe fitter, carrying black pipe up flights of stairs to put in for sprinklers. My father put in sprinkler systems, which is funny because now when I go in buildings, the first thing I look at is the sprinklers. So it's still there with me. But yeah, I'm a first-generation college student, and I still carry very proudly my working-class identity. To me, it's a very important part of who I am and the values that I try to bring to the table as an academic. It's very important for me that education be accessible, because it was precisely not accessible to me, and it was not accessible to my family and people like my family growing up. And so that's why I very much push education and accessible education as a very important topic and very important ideal for my work.
I wonder if you might say a little bit more about that identity and its values, and also the limited access you had to education.
I mean, basically, in terms of education, my middle school and my elementary school were meager. Like in many working class communities, we are the bottom of the bucket when it comes to funding. And at the same time, I remember my elementary school librarian did everything she could to help me find the books that I wanted to read. And it would be, books on vampires and ghosts and Atlantis and these kinds of things that really, at some level, I have not totally divorced myself from. Still, research, 17th century vampire legends and stuff. And but yeah, I remember getting the tattered copies of books that we had access to, and then going to even just a town over, or a better part of the town. They had these fancy books and these multiple copies of encyclopedias and stuff. So yeah, I remember those days. I remember the days of the hand-me-down books and that kind of thing. But yeah, I think that I come at academia from a working class point of view, where my labor is something I treasure and I value, and I treasure and value other academics' labor. And the truth be told is that the academy does not value academic labor. It's highly exploitative, pays poverty wages in some cases, unless you're one of the rare people to get a tenure track job. Academic publishing basically pays authors nothing. And big publishing companies like Oxford and Brill and Cambridge, they're incredibly wealthy. They make a ton of money, and they literally pay you nothing for publishing your book. And to me, it doesn't sit well. I'm very, very much opposed to the exploitation of academic labor. of graduate students and adjunct professors. The way that women are treated in academia is deplorable. And so, growing up, having to fight for a wage, at least for me, I've never forgotten that fight, and I bring it into the academic arena, either on YouTube or in publishing or in other academic work. It's all the same to me.
When did you notice that you had an interest in intellectual matters, and when did you start to set your sights on further education? You mentioned that you're a first generation college student, and of course, in theory, anyone can go to college, and anyone can, in theory, pursue advanced degrees. But practically, realistically, it can be, at least to some degree, generational. Particularly in the States, I think. So I'm curious about that. Well, maybe you could say something about the system in general, and why you mentioned first generation college student. Why is that important to mention? And what about your own path from Mississippi to going forward then in your education? When did you begin to notice there was something that drew you in that direction?
So I was very lucky. I had friends of mine who were also kind of budding intellectuals. We were sitting around programming computers and playing Dungeons and Dragons, and so like the mid to late '80s. So we're sitting around with Tandy computers and stuff, and we're reading old books. And I remember there was a moment where I was at the library. We had a good public library, and I was looking for books on the things that I was interested in as a kid, Atlantis and ghosts and stuff like that. And in the Dewey Decimal System, at least in the States, that's sort of the zeros, and then right after the 100s is where philosophy begins. And I remember looking at the shelf, and I must have been sixth or seventh grade, and there on the shelf was a book, and the spine very clearly said Aristotle, and I knew he was a big deal. I didn't know anything about Aristotle, but I knew the name. And then right beneath it said metaphysics, and something about that word, I knew that word meant the deep stuff. That's like that's the diving, right? And I pulled the book off the shelf, and and Aristotle says in that book, all men by nature desire to know. And I was like, I want to know stuff. And there was a moment, and I don't want to sound naive, or I don't want to sound whatever, but I'm happy to feel, as a kid, it was a sense of wonder, and I felt like the guy was talking to me. I felt like this guy, this ancient Greek dude, who I didn't know from head at all, I didn't know from Adam, he was saying something to me. All people, all men desire to know by nature. And then I sort of plunged into the metaphysics, and I didn't understand any of it. It was completely over my head. But there was something about that bewilderment, that sense of bewilderment. And of course, Aristotle also said that all philosophy begins in awe. It begins in bewilderment. And I was really bewildered. I had read other books, read a lot of books as a kid, and then I slammed into the wall of Aristotle's metaphysics, and it lured me in, but nothing was made easy for me, and I couldn't put the book down. I was trying to make sense of what he was talking about, and I never put it down. I'm still reading it, still working on Aristotle. I'm still working on this stuff. I'm still dealing with philosophy and metaphysics, and so that sixth grader version of me, or seventh, I don't know how old I was. I heard Aristotle speak to me through the millennia, and I still hear it. And luckily, I've been very lucky over the years to add a lot more people to that conversation. But college was a total accident. Total accident. I never intended to go to college. It was just a professor at a local university, local college, noticed I was reading Hegel, of all things, in a coffee shop before work, reading Hegel. And because I basically was told that, Hegel is the guy that wrote the book about history. He figured out how history worked. Now, that's debatable, of course. And I sat there reading before I went to work on, putting in pipe with my dad. I was sitting there reading Hegel in a coffee shop, and a local professor who I'm still a student of his. Thank God he's still with us. And he started talking. He's like, "Why are you reading Hegel? Are you a student?" I was like, "No, I work with my dad. I'm a pipe fitter." And he was like, "You can come to a place where we read these books all the time, and you can get money to do it." And I was like, "Well, that's a hustle. Pay you to read this stuff? That's a deal." And found out that sure enough, you can get some money to to do it. Not a lot of money. I'm still paying back my student debts. And there was a moment where I was on one side of the podium, and then several years later, I ended up on the other side of the podium. And that's kind of the journey. But it was a total accident. I had no intention of going to college. In fact, I grew up thinking that college was just for like preachers and lawyers. That's like, you went to college to be a preacher or a lawyer. And I didn't want to do either of those things. But it turns out you can go to college, do all kinds of weird stuff. And here I am making strange videos on YouTube about very obscure occult ideas. But yeah, uh, a strange journey. But I'm glad for it. It's made me very, very grateful and very humble that that we should never write anybody off, because that working class kid in that coffee shop trying to figure out how history works by reading Hegel, that was me. And yeah, I never want to ever look down my nose at what could come out of any population. God forbid how much genius we're losing to poverty in Africa and India and other places. It keeps me up at night to think of the Einsteins and the Newtons that we throw under the bus through poverty and ill education in the southern hemisphere. It terrifies me what human potential we spoil. But here's our world.
What was it like when you arrived at college? Did you grasp the culture quite quickly and align with that? Did you find tension there? What was that experience like?
It was mostly good. It was a bit bewildering because it wasn't really, really didn't understand a great deal about sort of what was going on, culturally. But I think I acclimated to some degree, but never really fit in. I mean, it was very much a middle and upper class kind of environment. And also I was there for the books. I mean, I didn't really get involved in the the Greek culture or the fraternities and the parties. I don't think I even drank alcohol until into my mid-20s. I was really there for the books and really there for the education. So and I don't think that's exactly the best thing. I think the socializing part of college is very important. I think that's one of the great tragedies of the college students of mine who had to go through COVID, basically doing college in lockdown. Horrible for lots of reasons, one of which is the socialization part, which I think is very important. But it was basically fine. But I do think of myself as a bit of an odd egg, because I wasn't there to like discover myself. I was there to read Thomas Aquinas and the Stoics and stuff like that. That's where I zoomed in on. But it was fun.
And that was at Millsaps College, your undergraduate degree. What was your degree?
So I double majored in religious studies and philosophy. So I really really threw all in. I double majored. I did I think I graduated like magna with honors. But I went as hard as one could as like and I was also working full time at the time. Really was working. I was at that time working in so IT security as an extension of having grown up with my friends doing programming and computer stuff. That was sort of, I knew enough about that I could do other kinds of work on the side to basically fund myself through college.
And what age range are we talking about here for that first degree?
Oh, I started late. I was in my early 20s. I don't think I finished college until my mid to late 20s. I think that's right. Yeah, I took my time. It wasn't I couldn't be the kind of kid that like lived on a dorm and did the whole thing. There's no way to do that.
And so then you finish your undergraduate degree. And what happens next? For some people, that's enough, but not for you.
No, I finished the degree and I had this outstanding interest in esotericism. It was just sort of an interest I had since I was a kid. And I wanted to leave the States. I wanted to go to Europe and live in Europe for a while. And so I applied to basically the only degree granting institution in the world at that time. It's basically still the only one really that grants a degree in the study of Western Esotericism. And luckily I was accepted and given some money, and I went to Amsterdam. I lived in Holland for a while. So it was a kind of thing where I knew that I wanted to do philosophy long term, but I was more than happy to do a religious studies detour. And of course, who wouldn't want to do a detour living in Holland? It's a beautiful country, and get to study amazing old books, and it really fired me my imagination for antiquarian books, which is now as part of my life, my business, and and I never dropped it. Even when I came back to the States and did a degree in philosophy, I maintained an interest in this Western Esotericism stuff, much to the chagrin, frankly, of my philosophy program, who really thought it was a bad idea for me to focus on that material. But they were wrong. So here I am.
Why did they think that? It's what sort of reputation does Western esotericism have as a field of study, or in those days, and perhaps it's changed. I don't know.
It's changed. It's changing. I don't know if it's changed, but there's an idea that if you're studying magic, then you're up to it. If you're studying Hermetic philosophy, then you're up to it. If you're studying these irrational, superstitious, perhaps even evil ideas, and then at some level you're up to it. And maybe people are, and there are definitely occultists who are also highly competent academics, and there should be no frankly, there's a great deal of religious bigotry in the world when it comes to people who have alternative spiritualities and occult practices, which I find deplorable as a religious minority myself. I find that just deplorable that my pagan and occult practicing people are basically discriminated against because of their religious beliefs, and in the academy. Another reason why the academy irks me. But yeah, I think that the general tenor was, if you bark up the tree of esotericism, no one will take you seriously. That they'll think that you're a wizard, or you're LARPing as a wizard, or you're irrational, or these ideas have been rightly abandoned, and now we're in the days of enlightenment, something, something, something. So it still has a negative reputation, and I was told explicitly in graduate school to not write certain papers, that they simply would not accept them. That if I argued, for instance, that Descartes developed rationalism from the result of a dream, he had a vision and a dream, that if I wrote papers like that, worked on material like that, that I could be basically blacklisted. Because there's a story we tell about ourselves, that we are the enlightened, rational West, and if you scratch at that, it can make people upset. It can make people it makes perfectly rational people apparently very anxious, and which I find to be highly stupid and highly hilarious. Ironic, considering that philosophy is precisely the place that one asks difficult, vexing questions. And it was the irony was never lost on me when I was told not to ask them.
Can you say something about your experience of further education in Amsterdam? What was it like?
I will say that the program in Amsterdam was my hands down the best educational experience I've ever had. The professors were inviting, world-class scholars, very inviting, very encouraging, very challenging. They would tell you when you're doing well, and they would often tell you when you're not doing well. And they'd be very clear. You muck this up. You need to do this right. So very high standards, but also met you and encouraged you to do things. I published my first paper with the encouragement of Professor Walter Hanegraaff, one of the real pioneers and luminaries in the field, a hero of mine. And he encouraged me to work a paper up, to publish it in the most prestigious journal for Western Esotericism. And he personally invested in that. This is a man who's he's one of the top 3 scholars in the world in this material, and he takes the time to do that. What a mensch. What a guy. And I came away with that, having a sense that one could be an expert, one could be the top of the field, and also be a good person and really do kindly by up and coming students, graduate students, And that was not my experience in the States during my PhD program in philosophy. And so I learned really important lessons about the importance of being as sharp as you can, but also being as humble as you can, and lifting up people on their journey. And that was an important lesson, and a lesson that is easily not learnable. Maybe even the opposite lesson is to be taught in the American system, which is highly competitive and very much about status and often about punching down. And I find that behavior just it's not just immoral, but it's also it's the worst kind of evil. It's petty evil. If you're going to be evil, be evil. Be like Lex Luthor evil. Like, you know, but there's nothing worse than petty evil. And that's what I see that runs rampant in a great deal of at least in the American academy, as far as I can tell.
Well, there is that truism that academia is so vicious because the stakes are so low.
It certainly could be. It's the kind of thing that I have no patience for. I call it out when I see it. I almost got into fisticuffs once with a professor when I was in Memphis, just because I just called it out. Like, no, it's gross, man. Like, don't do that. And if you, we can talk about it. We can, again, like, I'm still a working class guy. Like, we can talk about it indoors, and if we can't figure it out, like, we can go in the parking lot. We can talk about it out there. Like, but being oppressive and being morally using your power to punch down and hurt people, I'm not gonna. I can't stand for it. And I'll call it out. And he's like, I remember, like, we'll kick you out of here. Man, I can hang pipe, dude. Like, trust me, I can read Hegel for free. But what I can't do is sit down and keep my mouth shut when I see bad things happen. That's not for me.
Gosh, this is very interesting indeed. I'm wondering if you might say, I'm sure you thought deeply about it, something more about the contrast between your master's experience in Amsterdam and your PhD experience in University of Memphis. What do you think it is about the two systems that produces, is it the systems themselves that produce these very different cultures and outlooks? What's behind that? What are some of its characteristics and its implications, and perhaps any anecdotes that illustrate that?
I think the big difference is just a difference in the way that, in my experience, the Netherlands funded education. There's a lot more funding for it, and there's a lot more space, a lot more openness for students to be students and for them to find themselves and for them to do the work that they need to do. Whereas in the States, everything is highly competitive. There are programs where you compete for funding that, based on your grades, you get certain funding. And the job market is awful. It's a nightmare. If you don't come from NYU or Cambridge or Harvard or something like that, the odds of you getting a job are very low. And, and the systems are engineered to produce as many graduate students as possible because they shoulder a lot of the teaching along with adjunct professors who are paid poverty wages. And the system is engineered to produce as many PhDs as possible because basically that's your workhorse, and then turn them into doctors or whatever, and then put them into a job market where there are no jobs. And so everyone's racing to a red light, whether they like it or not. And the system is highly competitive. And I think that competition is not bad. I'm very pro competition, but there are certainly toxic forms of competition. And I think that the way that the American system is engineered is a highly toxic form of competition. Now, I don't know that there are better opportunities in terms of jobs in Europe. I do think that there are a great deal more postdocs and other kinds of things like that. But I'll compete. I'll take, I'll go to the mat and I'll compete as hard as anyone wants to because I love what I do, and I'll work at it 24 hours a day if I can because I love it. But there's something baked into the system where no matter how hard I work, if I get a PhD from the University of Memphis and someone else gets a PhD from New York University or Cambridge or Harvard, then no matter what, they're going to be better off. And of course, there's also the generational aspect. They're probably coming from more wealth. They're probably coming from more leisure. They probably have a leg up in terms of early opportunities and networking, et cetera. The single greatest predictor for who will become a congressman, a senator, or a president is what university they come from and what clubs they belong to. And I'm sure that's true for Europe, is in some senses true for America. But the way that it cashes out in the American education system is, I think, particularly toxic.
Because of the way that it funnels people into certain institutions which have so much more prestige than other institutions. Is that what you're driving at?
That, and that the system is engineered basically to produce more PhDs than the job market can handle, because PhD students are highly exploitative. They're highly exploitable, rather. You get a PhD student teaching your intro classes, you can pay them pennies on the dollar to what you pay a tenure track professor. And that, of course, that incentivizes the institutions to accept as many as possible, because all they have to do is basically give them titles, and they can do a great deal of the working that the university actually needs. All the while, university administrators are pulling six-figure incomes. And yeah, the situation in the university system is, I think, broken. It's deeply broken. I think it's been broken since the Middle Ages, and we haven't fundamentally rethought the university and public education, frankly, ever. There's never been a moment where, as a society, we sit down and think to ourselves, how should we educate ourselves? There have been moments in history where we thought, how should we govern ourselves? And those have been moments of terrible violence and other kinds of things, but we have made progress in questions of how we should govern ourselves. But there's never been a moment where in a society we've asked ourselves, aside from the institution of public education, K through 12, which is a huge boon in history, but there's never been a moment, I think, in the university system where we've asked ourselves as a society, what is constitutive of a good education? And I think that's one of the most decisive questions any society can ask itself, and maybe one of the most decisive questions that any democracy has to ask itself. And yet we don't do that, because I think that when we do, we would have to change a lot about our society. And I think we're quite frightened to do that. And again, looking at this from the perspective of a person who came from the bottom in some levels, not totally the bottom, but having come through the ranks, I will say that we have not asked ourselves this question, and we increasingly are producing a society of people for whom critical thinking isn't really a thing. Passing tests is more important than thinking. Memorizing, passing exams is more important than asking yourself, what is a good life? What is a moral life? What does it mean to be a good person? What does it mean to be educated? Is more about the way you fit in into society more than the questions you ask. And all of these things are to the great detriment, frankly, I think, to the great detriment of Western civilization. But again, I also say that from a position where I have a nice life here in Michigan. It's not expensive to live here. I have a very successful YouTube channel and other things that I've managed to find a way to make my life work financially, so that I'm not dependent on that system. But yeah, it's an aristocracy. It's an aristocracy, and again, I'm a very red-blooded American about this. I'm very skeptical of aristocracies. I think we mentioned this before we started filming. I'm even skeptical of this title doctor. I don't like these titles. I really am American in the sense that we fought a war to get rid of dukes and earls and all that, and yet we still are totally happy to let an academic aristocracy exist, where all this stuff is real. I don't find any of that interesting. I don't find any of that in the interest of education. I don't find any of that in the betterment of our society. But yeah, it's a system run through fear. It's a system run through, look, whether we like it or not, and I don't like it, and we should call it what it is. If there were a business or a gang that controlled all of X commodity in a community, we would call that a cartel. That's what cartels are. Well, universities in the academic world are just cartels, and they're cartels organized in a highly aristocratic way that are very much about structuring power in a highly exploitative fashion, in pretending that all of it's education. Now, education does happen despite all of that, thank God, but we don't focus on the cartel side of things. And it absolutely is a cartel. And when you're like, I don't want to get, I want to get knocked off by so-and-so. You're like, I don't want to get canceled and lose my tenure track job. I'm like, this is a cartel. It's an intellectual cartel. We should call it what it is. And if we don't like that, then we need to get in the business of changing it, or we need to get in the business of thinking about how education can function otherwise. And again, I've decided that YouTube is a place where I want to do education because I can reach people for free. None of my content will ever be paywalled, and I can reach 50,000 people providing education on the small thing that I know about, my expertise, my little area of expertise, and I can do that. And thank God I can. And YouTube's not perfect. I'm working for an evil corporation, so I know that I'm not morally pure because there is no moral purity in this world. But I can use a platform that does allow me to offer an education to people who want it, and they can do it without having to get student loans, without having to go into debt, without having to engage in this cartel, and they can do it at their convenience on their phone, and they can do it anywhere in the world. I have people message me from Brazil and say, some of the books that you talk about would cost me more than what I make in half a year's wages, but I can watch your videos and I can at least learn about them, even if I could never afford them. And my God, like what a blessing for me. What an opportunity, what a responsibility, but what a blessing that I, as an educator, have a platform where I can reach people all over the world and provide, again, my very small area of expertise. But I can do that without having to charge someone in Brazil or Africa or the American South a dime. They have to do some ads, and I hate those ads as much as the next guy. But it's a blessing for me. It's an absolute blessing for me, and I'm very, very thankful and very humbled that I have the opportunity to do it.
We'll get to esotericism in a moment, but I do have two more questions for you on education. The first one is, if I was to give you a magic wand, and I'll even let you choose the magic wand, with your knowledge of esotericism, I'm sure you could choose a particularly good one. And if I was to give you a magic wand and say, fix it, let's just take the States, fix it, this educational scene that you're describing here, what would you do?
I think that I would treat the university system a bit like a factory, because that's what it is. It's a factory that produces knowledge, and I would retool it in the direction of how factories are organized, which is to say that that professors should see themselves as intellectual workers, as intellectual proletarians, and I would see it such that management and the administrative systems have to be seriously cut back. That we should see that the production of knowledge done by adjuncts, done by graduate students, and done by professors is inimical to the administrative bloat that is very much about paying provosts and administrators hundreds of thousands of dollars to basically be administrators. I think that should be democratized, and that that professors should be doing a lot of that work, and that it should not be incentivized to climb the chain to become deans and provosts to make a bunch of money. That these are systems where education should be front and center, and making a high quality education front and center, just like a factory making a very good widget should be front and center, and that the wages and the living conditions are democratized and meritocratized, as opposed to it being an aristocracy. So if I could wave my wand, if I had a wand to wave, I would restructure it along the lines of a factory, and have the people in it be self-conscious of the fact that they are workers. They're no different than people who hang pipe. They're no different than people who fix transmissions. They're no different than people that lay concrete. They're intellectual workers, and to think of their task as intellectual workers should be front and center, and the education is what they're producing, not prestige, not titles, not poodles of money, but education as the very mortar of democracy and civilization.
Very interesting, thank you. And my last question on education, then we'll move on to esotericism, is languages. philosophy and religious studies, two of the fields you've done a lot of work in,
Mhm.
and particularly in religious studies fields. One thing I've heard from academics in that field is that there has been a de-emphasis on language
Absolutely.
and language capacity, the rise of the studies departments, which and a de-emphasis on languages, be they languages of antiquity, particularly, but also the sort of scholarly languages in which these fields are conducted, for example, French and German,
Mhm.
whatever. So I noticed on your website you list several languages, some ancient ones and some modern ones too. I wonder if you might list those for us and say a little bit about that. Do you share that idea that there's a de-emphasis in language and that could be a problem with engaging with primary sources and so on? And how did you acquire that language competency? It's a fascinating area. So I'd be very curious to hear you talk about that.
I think so. I think it's more true of America than Europe. In Europe, there was definitely an expectation that there's definitely an expectation that if you can read, you should be reading things in the original language. Uh, and that German and French are just there, like they're just expected. Uh, and that's easy for the Dutch because the Dutch are a very outward-facing people. They speak better English than I ever will, and so them learning German and French is there's the that's their border. There's the German and French in the sea, and so they learn to speak sea German and French, and of course English is right there just across the way. So in some sense, I can see how it's a privileged position for the Dutch to do that. But again, I go back to this Aristotle thing. When I was reading Aristotle as a kid, I knew he wrote in Greek, and I can remember seeing footnotes at the bottom of the book that written in this alphabet that I couldn't read, and I learned that was Greek. Um, and um, yeah, I think in America the emphasis, this is part of American imperial thinking, is that everything should conform to us, and we speak English, therefore Aristotle better damn well speak English, and everyone else should too. It's the hubris, the stupidity that comes along with hubris. And I've always rejected that. I studied Latin as early as I could. Um, Even in middle school, I started studying Latin on my own and eventually took it in high school. And then I added Greek and grew up also with some Hebrew because of synagogue life, and then Aramaic because of Jewish life. If you're going to be an educated Jew, then you have to read the Talmud, and the Talmud, of course, is written in Aramaic. Um, and then there just was a moment where it became very clear to me. I think there was a preacher or some person trying to convert me to Christianity or something, and they kept telling me the Bible says this and the Bible says that, and it dawned on me that they had never read the Bible before. They read translations of the Bible, and they kept telling me that in Isaiah it says that a virgin will give birth to a child, and I was like, it doesn't say that. The Hebrew doesn't say that. The Hebrew says an alma will give birth to a child. Alma just means young woman. It doesn't say virgin. There's a word for virgin in Hebrew, betula. It doesn't say a betula will give birth to a woman. Isaiah was a competent writer. If he wanted to say virgin, he would have said betula, not alma. Alma just means young woman. And there was a moment where it dawned on me when this person was trying to convert me that they had never read the Bible in the original language, and that they had based a deep fundamental belief about their life on a text that they had never read. And that horrified me because I do that. I was doing that. I was reading Hegel in English. I was reading Aristotle or whatever. I was reading these people. I was reading Deleuze or whatever. I don't know. I wasn't reading Deleuze then, whatever. I wasn't reading the French and German. I wasn't reading the Apocryphon of John in Coptic. And it dawned on me I'd never read anything. I just read a bunch of translations. And the moment I looked down my nose at that person trying to convert me because they had never read the Bible in Hebrew, you be careful who you point your finger at. Yeah. Yep. And I felt the finger point at me. I was like, I'll be damned. Time to double down. You got Greek, you got Latin, you got Hebrew, you got Aramaic. Go. Learn. Like, Sumerian's not magical. You can learn it. Akkadian's not magical. It's very closely related to Hebrew in some ways. Coptic's not magical. Do it. Just go do this. And I had a great professor, still a good friend of mine from undergrad. And he was like, okay, every summer we're going to do one. We're going to do one. We're going to do Ugaritic. All right, now we're going to do Coptic. Now we're going to do whatever. And yeah, still a good friend, Dr. James Bowley, a good friend of mine. And he convinced me that learning languages wasn't magic. It was just work. And you can do it. Anyone can do it. And it's the same thing if you take you spend an hour a day eating lunch. You can spend an hour a day learning Coptic. And after the end of a summer, you'll read Coptic. You won't be fluent. You won't be great at it. I still can't, you know. In fact, you know, right behind where I work, actually, you can't see it off camera. I have a shelf of scriptures, all the world's major religious scriptures, because I need them within arm's length to do my work. And then right above it, it's just my grammars and my dictionaries. Because the moment I pick up the Apocryphon of John in translation, you best believe that insofar as I'm able and I need to do it, I'm going to go to the Coptic. And it's not, I'm not special. I'm not a genius. I'm not some magical person, but it's this work. You know, the same work that takes to carry black pipe up 10 flights of 10 flights of stairs to put it, you know, sprinklers into a hotel. If you can do that, then you can sit down and learn Coptic. They're fundamentally not different. And so yeah, and if folks have watched Esoterica, you'll see often on the screen when I can the Coptic or Hebrew or whatever, it's right there, because we've not read it until we've read it, and you've not read it until you've read it in the voice of the person that wrote it, and their voice was not English.
Very interesting indeed, and of course that opens another can of worms, which is the philological dimension. Which version, which recension, etc. Is that something you ever get into that kind of worms of the philological?
Yeah, absolutely. When I'm doing manuscripts, you know, it sometimes drives people crazy when I'm doing an episode on something and I'm talking about, you know, we're gonna, you know, but this manuscript's not reliable. We have to do this manuscript, or we need some critical apparatus to tell us, oh yeah, of course. You know, I'll give one example of this. I make a lot of episodes on Solomonic magic. It's just sort of the bread and butter stuff I work on. And, you know, we all read the Key of Solomon, except for we don't. We read one very defective French translation of a Latin manuscript done by MacGregor Mathers or whatever in the 19th century, because that's the one he had access to in the Bibliothèque Arsenal. And now because he did it, now it's out of copyright, it gets reproduced. It's a defective manuscript. There are over 150 manuscripts of the Key of Solomon floating around Europe and America. There's no critical edition. We don't even know what they all look like. Oh yeah, like this is a huge thing. Like it's like a dirty secret of magic. There are 150, at least 150 manuscripts of this. I think Thorndike in the early 20th century detected 150. We don't even know what the stemma looks like. We don't know what the recension history looks like. We don't know. It's not been done because it's going to take an army of people to do it. It's going to take 5 scholars a lifetime just to do Key of Solomon manuscript stuff, and then to publish a critical edition of it. It's going to take a lifetime. 5 really good scholars and archivists. Yeah, the philological, codicological. I'm also a calligrapher, so like I've reproduced whole scrolls myself. I have one right behind me. I can grab it. Copied out an entire first book of Aristotle's Metaphysics by hand on papyrus, because I need to feel, you know, very tactile. Again, it's like it's a working mentality. Like I need to feel the scribe's pen on paper to understand the text. And as a calligrapher, you know, and people, I think it maybe bores people in Esoterica, but I often will show the manuscript right there. I'm like, this is what we have to be working with. You need to see it. I even have one of my favorite episodes that I've done early on in the channel was I went through just a whole paragraph of just deciphering one paragraph of a medieval manuscript, a necromancer's manual from the 15th century, and just unpacking. This is what the text looks like. Like when you read it in a book, you're not reading it. You're reading Richard Kieckeffer's very competent edition and translation. But until you see the manuscript in its cramped hand and abbreviations, like you don't see it. And I'm absolutely absolutely with the codicological part, both as a calligrapher, but also again as a person who you don't know it until you've done it. Copy out a medieval text. I've copied out an entire sermon in a contemporary hand of Meister Eckhart. I'm not Christian. I think Meister Eckhart's a spiritual genius and a genius philosopher. But I wanted to understand. There's a favorite sermon he wrote called the Sermon on Hunger. And I really wanted to understand it and really get into it. Like, all right, I'm going to spend 6 weeks copying the whole thing by hand. And I copied the whole thing. My kid's going to inherit a very strange collection of things. But that's what it takes. The codicological, the papyrological, the manuscript work. That's the foundation. I mean, you can always tell someone who knows about houses, because the person who really knows about houses, the first thing they're going to want to see. And I grew up in the building trades, and so I went. My sister-in-law bought a house, and immediately I just went to the basement, because the basement's all that matters. Everything else is decoration. Everything else is just like fun. I don't care what's upstairs. What matters is the basement. That's where the plumbing is, where the electrical is. That's where the boiler is. Everything else is commentary to the basement. The basement of all of these are manuscripts, and that's what matters. You can tell a serious scholar when they go to the manuscripts. You can tell a serious builder when they go to the basement.
Do you have any of these scriptorium style manuscripts you've produced easily to hand? I
can go get one. Yeah, you want to see?
I'd love to see it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll go grab one. So this is the Meister Eckhart. It's very washed out because of the lighting. But yeah, this is the Meister Eckhart that I did to get a sense of. Sorry, it's all washed out, but yeah. So I don't know how many pages it is. You notice I didn't do any of the initials because I'm a terrible drawer. I can do the calligraphy just fine, but I can't draw for muck. There's the one I started. And I can't lay gold very well, so I'll leave it to posterity to do the initials. But I don't know how many pages it is, but a few. And then here's this is Aristotle. This is the first book of the Metaphysics. I copied out by hand on papyrus. So I copied out the entire thing. I don't know how many meters it is stretched out, but some. And yeah, I even left the mistakes. Like I left it in my car when I was copying. I would copy it everywhere. I'd take it to coffee shops and copy. So you can see that column there by the microphone. It got rained on. I left my window down on my car, and it got rained on. And I thought to fix it, but then I thought, no, like manuscripts got bumped. They got beaten up. They got watered. They got water and burned. So leave the mistakes and leave the other stuff. So I don't know how long it took me to do this, but it took a little while. But I was transformed by it. Aristotle ceased to be an abstract character in some ways. He started to be something very real, because every single letter that he wrote, I had to write. And there's something. I'm not a believer in God or whatever. I'm a very boring materialist, but I will say that it's a spiritual experience for me. That there's something deeply transformative in this kind of process. It's a very meditative process for me, and I'm very grateful to be able to take a text of someone like the great genius Christian Meister Eckhart, and take that profound mystical spirituality and mystical philosophy, and my God, what an extreme privilege, and what a joy to be able to meditate on that genius letter by letter over the course of weeks. it's transformative, and I'm extremely, extremely grateful for having had the opportunity to do work like this.
That's beautiful. Thank you. I think this characterizes, or this illustrates, if you excuse the pun, two words that you've used about your own approach: sympathetic and scholarly, or enthusiastic, uh, and also scholarly. And that's coming across very clearly indeed. I think there's something you've said is quite interesting. You've written in your bio, we discussed it earlier, the work ethic you learned from your father, and that I think you've explained that in learning languages. It's like carrying pipe, and if you treat it that way, it's a tremendous way of looking at it. I wonder then, what are your routines? Do you have a particular routine or rhythm in terms of your intellectual work? Of course, one can go 100% 24/7, but that's difficult to sustain over years, and the quality of the work can degrade if it's done in that way. Although it's of course very impressive to watch that. Do you have some sort of routine, study habits, and so on that you've honed over the years that seem to work well for you?
I do. So I'm a believer in highly concentrated, high quality work over working a lot. I'm not a Protestant, so I don't believe in being busy. I think that when people say, "How are you doing?" and people say that they're busy, then I don't know. Anytime I hear the word busy, I hear the word I see time mismanagement. Um, so the way that I work is basically like this. I am a highly structured, highly ritualized person, which is, I think, a fault. My wife will gladly tell you that when I'm on vacation, I lose my mind because I don't have my rituals. I don't have my routines. I don't know what to do with myself. I kind of go crazy a little bit. So I'm routine to a fault, and I'll admit that what I'm about to say is not actually a virtue. It's actually a bug as much as it is a feature. But I get up at least at 6, ideally earlier. 5 is my go-to. I have an alarm for 6, but basically I beat my alarm awake. I never am woken by an alarm. I get up at 5 or 6. If I need to, I'll get up at 4. This week I had a really long episode to do, and my kids had to be out of school because of the weather. And so I knew that this week would be a crunch. And so getting up at 4 was it. It was just what had to be done. And no one likes to get up at 4, but there's a reason. We look at the great spiritual geniuses of the world, Buddhist monks and Christian monks. They're getting up at 3 and 4, and you can't expect results if you're not willing to do the work. And I look to their example as people who do the work, and I admire them greatly. My father got up at 5 um, to work, and I always think that, again, if a working class person can get up at 5 to slave away building a building, then I can get up at 5, to work in the book. So I get up, I do my administrative stuff first and foremost, because my turnaround time for emails is either 30 seconds or 30 years, as you probably unfortunately know. And I do my administrative work. I enjoy the quiet of the day because it won't be quiet again. And I get my kids off to school, and then I work. Mondays I write, Tuesdays I edit, Wednesdays I upload my videos for the week, and then I start studying for the next episode that Thursday. I go to the gym 4 days a week. So we're physical creatures. We're bodies, and there is simply no body that works, no mind that works without a high functioning body. So you got to eat, you gotta work, you need to use your body. As I get older, I'm more and more regretting that I wasn't in the gym earlier in life. And then on Friday today, at this afternoon, Shabbat. It's a Sabbath, and that means no. The Sabbath is the perpetual strike of history. It's the general strike against labor, and it says that labor is done. that we have done all that we will do, and now we must be. And it is a 25-hour period of being, just being. And thank God, but thank the God I don't believe in, that God has legislated that I must be and only be for 25 hours of the week. And that's a boon for me, and I take it very seriously. And that can mean a wide range of things. I'm not Orthodox, so it doesn't mean, not touching a light switch, but it does mean a focus on being and not doing. And then come Sunday, I'm back at the rig. But I have hobbies. I do amateur radio. I do calligraphy. I brew. I distill. I have all kinds of hobbies. But yeah, my sister-in-law is often shocked that she's like, how can you just sit down in front of a computer every Monday and write 5,000 words? And my answer is, I can do it because it has to be done. And I can do it because every working person in the world gets up every Monday and they go to work. And I'm not better than them. I'm not different than them. I don't have the idea that I have the luxury to shirk that labor and to shirk my responsibilities as an educator. That's sinful. It's vicious. And I don't want to give into that. Just because I do YouTube and just because I'm self-employed, I'm not self-employed. I'm employed by the masses of people who benefit from the educational work that I do, and that means that I'm absolutely not self-employed. I'm employed by those people, and those people deserve, whether they can financially support me or not, they deserve my work. They deserve to have access to what I have access to. I have the great luxury and privilege of having the education I have and all these books, and the longer I sit on them and don't make them available, what a place of avarice, what a place of hubris and greed. And I don't want to die having sat on my knowledge. I want to die having given as much of it away as possible. And the only way to do that is to get to work. But also not to kill myself. I'm also like, come 5 o'clock on Wednesday when the episode's over, I'll pour myself a good glass of wine or absinthe or whiskey, and I'm gonna sit back and relax and whatever, watch weird YouTube videos or whatever. So I'm not a workaholic, but I do think that one has an obligation to work, and one should produce high quality work. And for me, that means a highly structured or labor routine. And what that doesn't mean is kicking the can down the road, procrastinating, and all that. Procrastination is the worst form of self-hatred, because it just means that you hate your future. It's like, I hate future me. Procrastination is just you hating future you. And I don't hate future me. I like future me. And procrastination is just a form of self-hatred, and I don't have the time for it.
This discussion of work ethic makes me want to return again to this subject of languages. And you mentioned that, and I've heard other people say, they've said it on this podcast, a decline in language competency or study, foreign language, that is foreign to English-speaking people, in universities. And you would link that to American imperialistic thought, Aristotle should speak English like the rest of us. However, the problem with language demand is that it does require hard work, and people drop out. Language courses at university are notorious for starting off with whatever enrollment they have, and then each year it gets less and less and less and less because it's hard, and it's one of those areas that is difficult to bluff. Has there been an increase in American imperialism of late? Perhaps not, but maybe a decreasing standards so as to increase retentions. But perhaps it's more of an economic incentive than it is to do with American imperialism. I wonder what you think of that. And also, what advice would you give somebody now who might be watching, who would really, young person thinks, I'm inspired by what Dr. Sledge, although he hates the title, has said, I want, how I'd like to do that. I want to get the languages together. I want to go to university and I want to get that education and I want to work hard and do it and so on. What advice would you give a young person who's inspired by what you're doing and authentically wishes to follow in, that sort of a mode?
So I think you're right about the first question, that there's been a de-incentivizing of learning of language just for lots of reasons. It's hard and we don't want to fail people. Yeah, I think that's part of it. Also, I just think that, frankly, if you're going to be an engineer, you need to learn Chinese or Hindi. You learn Greek, like Latin. Like I just don't. I work at a technological university, and I would never want my engineering kids, young people, to learn Latin. It's stupid. Like they need to learn Chinese. Like that's what they need. Learn Mandarin or something. So I think that there's also like a hoity-toity sort of like, if you're going to be educated, there's a weird idea that to be educated, you need to have Latin or Greek or something. That's bizarre. If you're going to be working in Latin and Greek, you need to have Latin and Greek. Otherwise, who gives a damn?
I perhaps ought to interject that I do mean specifically in the fields, religious studies, etc., etc. I wasn't suggesting that the wider, that an engineer needs to learn Latin, although
I think that and I think that also I hear a lot of people say things like I hate math, but what they really say is I had really bad math educators. That's what they're really saying. Like I had bad math educators. I love math. I'm not good at it, but the systems that taught me math failed me, and not even the teachers, because the teachers, they're beholden to all these different stupid standards. So I don't blame them. Far from it. But I had a bad math education. I think that also we have bad language education. I'll give you an example with Latin. We teach Latin in this sort of what's the right way of putting it? Like math. It's a bunch of equations you have to memorize. You need to memorize all the different declensions and conjugations, and then you need to like do translations. Here's Cicero, go, and that tells you whether or not you know Latin. We shouldn't treat Latin that way. We shouldn't treat Greek that way. We shouldn't teach Akkadian that way. We should teach them as living things. And if we teach Latin as a language that you can talk in, and a language that you can read, and a language you can write in, frankly, as a living thing, like all languages are alive, they're moving, shaking, vibrating things, even so-called dead ones. If you think about reading Akkadian, and you're not reading Akkadian, you're talking to Hammurabi. You're hearing Hammurabi speak. How would you respond to Hammurabi? How would you respond to Isaiah? How would you respond to Cicero? We need to think of them as living things and not a bunch of equations to memorize and then do a bunch of like number chopping, logic chopping. And when we do education like that, Latin education, I'll give the example of Latina Vivans, living Latin. There are people out there that speak Latin, and they speak Latin fluently as a second language, and they love it. They have fun. They have conferences, and they engage with Latin in a way that is completely alive, and not completely alive in an ecclesiastical environment, which is also interesting, but they engage with it in a totally different way. So we just, again, this is part of the drum I beat about education reform. We just have to think about education in new ways. We have to look at pedagogical data, and the pedagogical data shows us that the way we've been teaching people for the past 50 years is not ideal. It is not a data-driven, it is not an evidence-based way of teaching. And insofar as we're committed to science, and I'm pretty committed to science, and at least the university is allegedly committed to it, why in the name of God would we not be scientific about pedagogy? And pedagogy tells us the way we've been doing a lot of the stuff is wrong. It does not meet students where they are. It does not help students learn. And that's true of language. It's true of literature. It's true of mathematics. It's true of a lot of things, maybe all of it. And if we're not willing to do the work of reforming those institutions to make them function, then it's unsurprising that students fall and drop out. They're the ones who are rational because they're not being served and they're not being educated. They're not paying. They're not getting for what they pay for. If you went to a supermarket and you paid for milk and they didn't give it to you, or they gave you sour milk, you would leave and you'd protest. Well, students leave and protest because they're being betrayed and they're being hustled out of thousands of dollars or euros or pounds or whatever. So my advice, to go to the other question for young students, is if you want to go to the university, great. Don't expect anything on the other side of it. No job, no status updates, nothing. Expect that you'll go through it and you'll be smarter than you were on the front end, but you won't be better, and you will be poorer, and you will not have higher access to a job. And that's true of PhD students as well. If you love Beowulf and Old English, go get a PhD in Old English. And understand that that PhD in Old English is going to get you a title by your name, and that's it. Nothing else is necessitated on the other side of that project. There is no job. There's no nothing. You're likely to go start as a pipe fitter, get a PhD in Old English, and then go back to being a pipe fitter. Now you can read Old English. Now, frankly, you can teach yourself Old English. You can teach yourself Beowulf. You can read the secondary literature. You can pirate all these expensive academic books, and I would highly encourage people to pirate as many academic books as possible, because academic publishing is a complete cartel, and they should be extorted by every single person who can afford to extort them. So go to LibGen or whatever and steal every academic book you can get your hands on, because those people are highly exploitative to the people that write for them and to the people that want to buy them. Hundreds of dollars for books sometimes. It's extremely, it's frankly sinful, and it's offensive, both to the people that are not being paid to write them and to the people who are paying enormously to get them. So my advice is, you can be a working class person, you can be a server at a restaurant, you can be whatever, and you can get a world-class education for free. It's called a library card. You can do that. It's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take a lot of dedication. It's going to be hard. You're going to have all the problems that come along with being an autodidact. There are problems that come along with being an autodidact, just like there are problems that come away with you being academically trained. People think that's the gold standard for education. Absolutely isn't. Although I will say autodidacts have their own set of problems that are unique to them. You can get all that education for free. And so I would say, if you're going to the university to get a job, then you've already made your first mistake. Because there is no jobs. There are no jobs on the side of it, basically. If you love to learn, learn. And the only way to do that is to have a good work ethic. And know that you're going to have deficiencies in your learning, because of being an autodidact always has that. But trust me, I've met plenty of academics who are stupid as the day is long. And academia has made them stupider in some senses. Again, that Foucault talked about the academy as a truth-producing institution. Not only is it truth-producing, but it produces certain kinds of intellectuals. And those kinds of intellectuals, I think, are very important, but we should never, ever think that they are the gold standard of what it means to be smart, what it means to be educated, what it means to be well-rounded, what it means to be any of those things, well-read. The academia makes you, it absolutely can make you, it can and does make you strategically stupid. And that's also a fault of the academy. But again, being an autodidact also has its problems. Neither one are perfect. But yeah, I would say go to the university if you love studying things. As you climb the ladder, pay as less as possible. If you find yourself paying for a master's or a PhD, run. Like, if they're not paying you, they don't respect you. And if they don't respect you, I can guarantee you that on the other side of it, they're not going to respect you anymore, and they're not going to give you a job. So do not, by the time you get through a 4-year degree, you know how to study. You know what academia looks like. You can do that on your own. And so if you find yourself having to pay for an advanced degree, run. It's a bad investment. I know I sound very hard on the academy, but I'm hard on it because it's important. And in the same way that we should be hard on, if I were a doctor, I'd be hard on medical practice. That's what I know, and it matters. We don't want crappy doctors. They kill people. We don't want crappy educational institutions because they miseducate people. And the only thing that separates democracy from mob rule is education. That's it. The only thing that separates democracy from mob rule is education. Without an educated electorate, we live in mob rule. And I don't want to live in mob rule. And so if the official institutions of education are failing, that makes me worried about democracy. And I think we see the fruits of it here in the United States. And I don't want that. I don't want that as a minority. I don't want that as a person who's close to women, is close to trans people, who's close to other minorities. I don't want mob rule, because mob rule's horrifying. And if the official institutions that are doing the educational work are failing us, then we need to think about some kind of reformation or more. I don't know, but they're certainly taking a lot of people's money, plunging them into debt, and then kicking them out the other side, calling them educated, and I'm not sure they are, and they're certainly not getting jobs. And I think that is the thing that we should rightly protest against. And all the while teaching them to look down their nose at working class people. That is as if the bus driver and the garbage person, or the guy that installs your HVAC system, or fixes a transmission, or checks out your groceries at the store, as if somehow they're less than because you don't have fancy they don't have fancy titles by their name. And that to me it's that kind of pride, hubris, it's worthy of disgust. I mean, I imagine many people listening to this have had professors who insist on being called professor or doctor, and they stomp their foot and cry when they don't get their letters. It reminds me of the days of when the aristocrats were finally on the out. They're living in giant mansions that they can't afford to keep warm anymore. There's something petulant about that attitude. It's frankly embarrassing. I feel embarrassed for them. And yeah, I mean, I get it. People work hard to get these degrees. They work hard to get an education. I get it. I did it. But at the same time, to think that entitles you. And again, that's my complaint, right? Is it does entitle you. You do get a title. And I don't like entitlements. I don't like that mentality. I'm an educator. I'm no different than the guy who swings the hammer. Like, I swing the hammer of education, and he swings the hammer putting in, railroad. We're just swinging hammers. It's all the same.
Well, this has been a very interesting discussion. We haven't even begun. We haven't even got past the first paragraph.
Oh,
for you. I must petition you for a sequel, Justin.
Absolutely.
Oh, good. I would like to talk with you about all your various work, and I'd like to start off with, it's on your FAQ page where you answer various questions about yourself. Are you a practitioner of esotericism, magic, Kabbalah, etc.? And if not, why not? You know about these things, why don't you do it? And you say, no, I have a religious reason, but also I don't find the promises of such practices nor the worldview implied interesting or tempting. Salvation, enlightenment, gnosis, etc. just don't interest me personally as spiritual goals. Not to say that they aren't interesting concepts as such. Now, that is a very interesting statement, and I would be very delighted to begin our sequel just at that place.
Sure. Yeah, people are often shocked about that line for some reason. People say, people are like, yeah, have you ever meditated don't you want to be enlightened? I don't want to be enlightened. I have no interest in that. That seems like a lot of work. You know, I will say before we end that I don't have a lot of fear in life. Although I will say my father once said that once you have kids, you experience fear for the first time, and he was absolutely right. I can't watch like things about serial killers anymore now that I have kids. I just can't stomach it. Um, but yeah, there's a sense of the one horror I have is one day I'll die. I'm not really horrified about that. That's fine. I'm looking forward to that, frankly. But the horror is I might wake up on the other side of something. That there might be something. I might wake up in heaven, God forbid, and now I'm there forever. And the idea that I have to be somewhere forever, no version of that is heaven. Every version of that is a hell. And I don't want the prospect of having to wake up after this life into enlightenment or heaven or Gandhian or whatever. That's a nightmare. There's no worse nightmare than heaven.
Even if heaven has a very good library with the great lost, all those lost books and chapters and so on of the great authors that you've read, you wouldn't like to visit the antiquarian book section of heaven?
No, not at all. I always tell people that ideally one day it'll be a hot day and I'll cut the grass and I'll sit down in a chair and have a beer, close my eyes, and that'll be oblivion. And that's it. If I wake up in some damn library, I'll be pissed. I don't care what's in there. I can have Aristotle's lost second book of the Poetics or whatever it is. I can keep it. Give me oblivion. I don't want. Yeah, like I said, heaven is a positive nightmare. Enlightenment is a nightmare. Gnosis, all that. I meet people for whom that is they spend their life dedicated to finding gnosis and enlightenment, and I'm like, it's to me it's like racing toward a red light. Like I don't get it. I never understood it. I don't want to be. No, I have no interest in being enlightened. I'm very boring in this way. Not to say it's not a worthy goal. I mean, people who've achieved it have done great things, but that's not for me. I'm very stupid in this way.
Do you think people have achieved it?
Oh yeah, for sure, absolutely. I mean, there's no reading the Buddha. There's no reading the Hasidic masters. There's no reading the great, the Advaita Vedanta. There's no reading the Upanishads. There's no reading, whoever wrote, the sequence in Voluspa, where Odin hangs himself and gets wisdom. Those shamans and these people who've done this, yeah, they've done it. I'm not saying it's not to be done. It can't be done. There's nothing there. There's there. I'm convinced of that. And it's a great genius in having done it. Great heroism in having done it. It's really an athletic business. But if someone said, would you, I would trade a couple tacos for enlightenment. It's not for me. I don't, not for me. I'd rather have a really good glass of rye whiskey and call it a day and skip the gnosis.
Well, I'd like to probe you a little on that next time. And indeed, you have touched the transcendent through psychedelic experiences and so on. You've written a little bit about that. So, and you think there's a there, but you'd say, okay, that sounds great. So, for the sequel, perhaps. Dr.
Sure.
Justin Sledge, thank you very much.
No, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for such thoughtful questions. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to another Guru Viking podcast. For more interviews like these, as well as articles, videos, and guided meditations, visit www.guruviking.com.